This week on Africa Weekly, we focus on Mozambique, where a UN-funded program is aiming to educate young people about family planning. We travel to Somalia, where citizen initiatives are seeking to educate children displaced by war and famine. And we head to Tunisia, where tourism is kicking off 3 years after terror attacks. But first, a summary of the stories that made the headlines this week. After 2 decades of war, Ethiopia's Prime Minister and Eritrea's President signed a peace deal to put an end to the conflict between the neighbouring countries. The Horn of Africa nations cut ties after the outbreak of a border war that started 10 years ago, which left 80,000 people dead. The two nations have restored telephone communications for the first time in 2 decades, and Ethiopian Airlines is set to begin passenger flights between the two capitals as early as next week.
Even though the two nations are separated because of the mistakes made by their leaders, now we've witnessed that we are one. The wall is demolished, bridges have been built, and we are full of joy.
Mourners attended the funeral of Tunisian police officer Arbi Gouzani, who died with 5 other members of the country's security forces in a terrorist attack near the border with Algeria. The Tunisia-based division of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb claimed responsibility for the assault. The country's deadliest incident in over 2 years comes as Tunisia is hoping for its best tourist season since the spate of jihadist attacks in 2015 sent visitor numbers plunging. Cameroon's head of state, Paul Biya, announced his re-election bid in the country's presidential elections, scheduled for October 7th. Elected in 1982, the 85-year-old is Africa's oldest and longest-serving president. The vote will take place in a context of mounting problems. A convoy transporting the defense minister was ambushed on Friday in the country's restive Anglophone region, leaving several attackers dead and at least 5 people injured. Zimbabwe's main opposition vowed to press on with demands for fair elections as thousands took to the streets to petition the Electoral Commission with a slew of grievances. The country goes to historic polls, the first without longtime ruler Robert Mugabe on July 30th to elect a president, legislators and municipal councillors.
We have nothing to lose in this country. We have lost everything, but we are prepared to defend our right to an integrity. Here votes.
3 weeks before Election Day in Mali, more than 60,000 people attended the first campaign rally of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita in Bamako on Sunday, a day after the official launch of the presidential campaign. The incumbent president and the opposition frontrunner are expected to be the 2 main candidates in the July 29th polls out of a field of 24 hopefuls. More than 30,000 security and defense officers have been mobilized amid fears of possible jihadist attacks.
Emma is just 13. Like many very young girls in Mozambique, Emma became pregnant while still a child herself. She now lives with her grandmother, also called Emma.
I saw that she wasn't looking well, so I asked her, "Is it school? Please let me know."
Her granddaughter was actually raped, becoming pregnant by her attacker.
I told my grandma I hadn't bled for 4 months. She told me I was pregnant and I had no idea what was going to happen.
Mozambique struggles to provide sufficient sex education, a country where over 65% of the population's under 25. The UN are trying to make an impact. In this school in the north of the country, young girls come to talk about family planning. Mariamo's here because she's seen too many friends forced to stop school after becoming pregnant.
I don't want to have children early. I want to finish school first, and then I'll be able to have sex with my husband.
While the education of young women is crucial, men obviously have a role to play too. For this campaigner, they are at the heart of the problem, notably because, according to tradition, fertility is seen as a sign of virility.
If a man has just 1 or 2 children, in the eyes of other men or society, it might seem as if he's really weak.
To fight against early pregnancies is also to fight against early marriages. The law allows marriages at 18 or at 16 with parental consent. But exceptions are still commonplace. This young woman's just given birth. She married at the age of 15, before the legal age, like almost 1 girl in 6 in Mozambique.
Uprooted from their homes by war and famine, these children are finally back in the classroom. For years they've been living with their families in IDP camps outside Mogadishu, where everything is lacking. Young student volunteers are teaching them basic literacy and numeracy skills under makeshift shelters, sometimes just under a tree.
At first we could not even feed them, but at least we could teach them to make them into an educated generation.
The volunteers teach nearly 600 students, aged between 6 and 15, in 4 refugee camps near the capital.
I like studying in this school, and later I want to be a nurse to help people in hospitals.
Without resources, families cannot afford to send their children to school. The courses given by the young volunteers offer an alternative to Quranic schools, which are the only other source of free education.
These volunteers give classes to many of my children because I cannot pay school fees. Before, I did everything I could to get 2 of my sons to go to school. It costs $20 a month each. I have other children and I cannot pay for school.
Decades of civil war and famine have led hundreds of thousands of Somalis to flee their homes and settle in these forgotten camps. It's hoped the initiative will help some of the country's most destitute children to dream of a better future than their parents.
Sunshine and sandy beaches. Tunisia's idyllic tourist coast is coming back to life. After a serious drop in visitors following attacks in 2015 at the Bardo Museum and in Sousse, tourism is on the rise once again.
If we take the figures from 2014, since then we haven't reached the same numbers of bookings. There is indeed recovery, but there's still some way to go.
Improved security in tourist areas and the devaluation of the Tunisian dinar has seen tour operators return. With more than 3 million visitors in the first quarter of 2018, Tunisia is regaining its place at European travel fairs.
I stay here 10 days, the same price I would stay 4 days in Paris or Amsterdam. It's cheaper to be here, and you've got everything.
Tourism is key to the country's growth, representing 7% of the GDP. The sector has increased its promotional offers and diversified into new markets, seeking to attract Russian and Chinese visitors in particular.
The growth in tourism indicators is due primarily to the return of security and security checks in hotels.
For the first 6 months of 2018, revenues have reached more than €420 million. But the sector is still at the mercy of security incidents in the country. An attack in early July left 6 policemen dead in western Tunisia. For now, growth in Tunisia's tourism industry remains fragile.
Nestled high in the Lesotho Mountains, skiers and snowboarders from across the world rubbed shoulders in one of Africa's leading ski resorts, which hopes to establish itself as a leading alternative destination for winter sports.
I found that our European guests and American guests and stuff which come down into this direction, they generally actually come here as a unique destination. They don't come here because it's 1 kilometer of skiing. They don't come here because they expect in massive mountains. They do, however, come here because they're like, great, it's skiing in Africa, it's a bucket list, let's do it.
That's all from us at Africa Weekly. Until next week.